5, 6 times. Never sounded like that before. What did you do? Great, thank you. Before I begin, Becky's numbers had me thinking too. The first thing that popped in my head for number 3 was 3 blind mice. And I'm not alone, Carl had the same thought. Our New Testament this morning is from the Gospel of Luke, chapter 4, verses 1 through 13. And can be found on page 1595 in your pew Bibles. Listen and discern God's word for you. This is a passage with which we're very much familiar. On the temptation. Jesus, full of the Holy Spirit, returned from the Jordan and was led by the Spirit in the desert, where for 40 days he was tempted by the devil. He ate nothing during those days, and at the end of them he was hungry. The devil said to him, "If you are the Son of God, tell this stone to become bread." Jesus answered, "It is written, man does not live on bread alone." The devil led him up to a high place and showed him in an instant all the kingdoms of the world. And he said to him, "I will give you all the authority and splendor, for it has been given to me, and I can give it to anyone I want to. So if you worship me, it will all be yours." Jesus answered, "It is written, worship the Lord your God and serve him only." The devil led him to Jerusalem and had him stand on the highest point of the temple. "If you are the Son of God," he said, "throw yourself down from here, for it is written, he will command his angels concerning you to guard you carefully. They will lift you up in their hands so that you will not strike your foot against a stone." Jesus answered and says, "Do not put the Lord your God to the test." When the devil had finished all his tempting, he left him until an opportune time. This is the word of the Lord.
Thanks be to God.
Let's pray. Father, let the words of my mouth and the meditation of my heart be acceptable in thy sight, O Lord, my strength and my Redeemer. How long is a month and a third? That's the title this morning. Month and a third. The older we get, the shorter it seems to be. Have you noticed that? In the big picture of our time here on earth, a month and a third is a blink of an eye. However, if you're 5 and your birthday is still a month and a third away, it's an eternity. A month and a third is 40 days. We find the number 40 mentioned 146 times in the Bible. We're back to numerology. 40 days represents a period of probation, trial, or testing. In the case of Moses, who lived in Egypt for 40 years and spent 40 years exiled in the desert, God was giving him the time to learn leadership and wilderness survival techniques. Then we see that he spent 40 days and 40 nights on Mount Sinai on 2 separate occasions, receiving God's law. In that case, it seems that God was testing the Israelites as well as further testing Moses. The prophet Jonah spent 40 days warning the people in Nineveh that their destruction was imminent. The prophet Ezekiel spent 40 days laying on his right side to symbolize the sins of Judah. Elijah went 40 days and 40 nights without food or water on Mount Horeb. After Noah had built his ark, it rained for 40 days and 40 nights. The book of Exodus is 40 chapters. Israel was ruled by judges for 40 years. The first 3 kings of Israel each ruled for 40 years, and so on. Jesus spent 40 days and 40 nights in the wilderness where he fasted. After his resurrection, he appeared to his disciples for 40 days. The 40 days in the wilderness are the subject of today's New Testament lesson. Luke tells us that during his fast, during those 40 days, Jesus ate nothing. We often think of a fast as doing it without food or water. But as Cliff told us a few weeks ago, we can only go about 3 days without water. Dr. Luke probably knew that and told us that he did without food. Many of the Native American tribes have a ritual that includes fasting for a boy to become a man. Boys go out into the desert, have what is referred to as a vision quest. Fasting puts one into a point of serious meditation when the mind can contemplate and even develop hallucinations. The object for the young Indian is to discern what God would have him do as a man. I am not suggesting that Jesus hallucinated the encounter with the devil here. I do believe that God planned for his son to have an encounter with Satan in order to have the tools with which he could begin his ministry. Luke tells us that Jesus was led into the desert. In the first chapter, verse 12 of Mark, depending on your translation, he tells us that Jesus was sent, in the NIV, or in the NEV, driven into the desert. I tend to think that driven is the more accurate description of how God sent Jesus away to further develop through temptation and testing. Excuse me. During that 40 days, Satan tempted Jesus at least 3 times. The first temptation was to turn the stones into bread. See, Satan knows that Jesus has the power and the ability to do that. But Jesus answers, man does not live by bread alone. Jesus knew his Torah well and used the words of Moses from Deuteronomy 8:3 in his response. Then Satan took Jesus up onto a mountain and spread all the kingdoms of the world for Jesus to see, and then told him, it's all yours, Jesus. All you have to do is worship me. And how did Jesus answer this generous offer? He said, it is written, worship the Lord your God and serve him only. Here Jesus wisely quotes Moses again from Deuteronomy 8:13. As a final temptation, Satan then had Jesus stand at the highest point in Jerusalem and told him to jump. Satan is also a sly fox. He also uses the Old Testament and quotes from Psalm 91:11 and 12, when he tells Jesus, for he will command his angels concerning you to guard you in all your ways. They will lift you up in their hands so that you will not strike your foot against a stone. Jewish tradition believes that this quote is attributed to Moses and was written in the Psalms by David. Now Jesus again rebukes Satan, quoting Moses again from Deuteronomy 6, saying, it is said, do not put the Lord your God to the test. At the end of these 3 attempts by Satan to lead Jesus astray, he left, and Jesus returned from the desert and began his ministry. The story of the temptations in the wilderness is really rich with knowledge for us about what kind of man Jesus has become. We know that he is a man of great principle and knowledge. When starving, those rounded stones probably look just like loaves of bread. We usually think of the false oasis images when someone is really thirsty. I see Jesus looking at those stones in the very same way, almost like an oasis. I doubt that any of us has ever been tested to this degree. I certainly haven't. But it would be easy to think that we could follow Jesus' example and resist it, wouldn't it? But in serious reflection, I truly doubt that I would turn my back on a loaf of bread if after not having anything to eat for the 35 plus days. Right now, I can barely walk past the bakery section of the supermarket right after eating lunch, for Pete's sake. Jesus was certainly tempted to yield these temptations, but had the integrity and stamina to do exactly as his Father wished him to do. Aldo Leopold, American author, philosopher, scientist, ecologist, environmentalist, tells us that ethical behavior is doing the right thing when no one else is watching, even when doing the wrong thing is legal. What Leopold failed to mention is that God is always watching and knows our every move. I'm sure that Jesus was keenly aware that God had driven him out into the wilderness in order to learn as well as to discover more about himself. Certainly, if anyone on earth was most aware of God's constant presence, it would have been Jesus. Looking at several timeline explanations, it appears that Jesus went out into the wilderness right after being baptized by John the Baptist. At that time, Jesus would have been about 28 years old. He was crucified at about 32 years old. The point of this is scholars opine that the 40 days in the desert were a prelude to his 40 days before his death and resurrection. Now, that makes a lot of sense to me. Everybody needs a really full toolbox to undertake difficult tasks. Those 40 days gave Jesus the tools that God knew he would need in order to work for the next 4 years, forming the basis of our religion. So here we are at the beginning of Lent. Today's the first Sunday in Lent. It says so right in your bulletin. The 40 days and 40 nights beginning with Ash Wednesday and ending on Easter Sunday. As Dr. Toole pointed out in this month's Grove Visitor, Lent is not mentioned in the Bible. According to the organization Grace Through Faith, the word Lent comes from a Germanic root meaning spring, but is more often associated with the 40 days from Ash Wednesday to Easter Saturday. It actually originated in the Babylonian pagan religion, but was folded into Christianity when the Roman Empire adopted Christianity as its official religion. No matter how, where, or when Lent began, we do observe it as the official period of the liturgical year when we think about our faith. It's a great time for introspection, thinking about this. For many, it's a period of giving up some food or luxury item for the entire period. As a boy, I remember all of my friends sacrificing by not eating candy or giving up pizza or quitting smoking, etc., ad nauseum. What always struck me about these sacrifices is that the individual had to make sure we all knew what he or she was giving up. Jesus gave without saying a word. I think it's a bit hypocritical to expect praise for your sacrifice. In fact, boasting about it kind of unwinds the whole thing. Even though I never quite understood why, my mom had us eat fish on Ash Wednesday and all Fridays in Lent. And at that age, I didn't much care for fish. I guess I was giving up meat without knowing it. Giving something up for Lent symbolically is supposed to recognize Jesus' sacrifice for us. I don't see how that would ever help me understand Jesus' crucifixion. Somehow, not eating hamburgers doesn't rise to the level of giving up a life. In this month's Grove Visitor, Dr. Toole suggests that instead of giving up something, that we take up something for Lent. Small change in words, give and take. Now I can get into that. Can you think of something you could take up for Lent? Dr. Toole suggests we choose something that involves our spiritual growth or perhaps service to others. There are many areas around our community that need another pair of hands or a talent that you could donate. I'm sure the local hospital or nursing homes would love to see you come in to volunteer. In the area of spiritual growth, there are any number of great books available to help you better understand and answer the questions that you've never quite asked. You can get outdoors more and truly relish in all that God gave us. How about spending more time with others? Go visit with someone you haven't seen in a while. You'll gain every bit as much as they do. I think the one that I'll take up this year is to pray more. I intend to pray for little things and turn worry into prayer. I suggested as we enter Lent this year and years to come that we take the time to intentionally focus on our relationship with God. I'm not suggesting that we don't focus on this relationship at other times, but Lent can and should be a special challenge to take an extra step and intentionally change some daily habit or portion of our lives as it relates to God. It is not easy to give up or take up a thing, whatever it may be, and follow Jesus' example and spend time in the wilderness. But it is an opportunity to find new life in our relationships. And prayerfully, as we emerge from the wilderness and from our Lenten fast and celebrate the Easter season, we can be re-energized in the ministry and work that we engage in. What will you take up for the next month and a third? Amen. You join me in hymn number 507.